this is Group 9's presentation on the effects of COVID-19 on online retailers with Ferry, Kenan, Kurtz, and Ashley Raker. Hi, this is Ashley Raker. I will be going over basic information on where e-commerce and online retailers stood before the COVID-19 pandemic and now during the COVID-19 pandemic in relation to product demand and consumer spending, to later set up for the labor demand side later on in the presentation. One thing I do want to note is that online retailers and e-commerce was growing way before the COVID-19 pandemic. In fact, you can see from this chart that there was a steady growth and increase in e-commerce from quarter one 2010 up to the third quarter of 2019, with very few plateaus or slight dips throughout the growth. And I mean, it just shows that online retailers were already solidifying their grounds within the market in comparison to brick and mortar retailer stores, and just been increasing their market power, especially considering the large spike at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic on this chart. So during the COVID-19 pandemic, according to these charts that you can see that from 2019 to 2020, you can see that total retail sales increased 4%. However, e-commerce sales increased by 30% within the same time frame. So an overall increase of around 26% of e-commerce sales, taking in account for regular growth from retail sales. And then additionally, a survey found that around 36% of people said that they now shop weekly compared to 28% the pre-COVID pandemic, which can definitely be seen in the next slide when it comes to weekly online orders. So looking at this chart, you can see an obvious increase starting after March 13th, when I feel like was a very pivotal point within the COVID-19 pandemic. And you can see the height of online orders in mid to late April. It does seem to go down past that into June. However, it's still higher than it was pre-COVID. In comparison to 2019, with the height of order counts being almost 165% of what they were in 2019 for the April time frame. Obviously, this increased demand has had effects on businesses, especially considering the large and sudden spike in online orders. In fact, even huge corporations such as Amazon had to shift their business model. They had to shift to, they stopped accepting shipments for non-essential goods from wholesalers and other third-party distributors as it attempted to prioritize warehouse space for products of the COVID-19 response. So obviously, even large online retailers had limited space within their warehouses and limited people to be able to provide all of the products that people had been demanding.
In the short run, COVID caused labor demand for online retail to increase. Due to the increased consumer demand for online retail due to COVID, firms will want to increase their profits by expanding production. Expanding production will cause labor demand to increase, pushing wages and the employment level up, which is shown on the graph. In the short run, COVID caused the labor supply for online retail to decrease. The high risk of infection through close contact to others prevented workers from participating in the labor force. The risks associated with COVID in the workplace caused many workers' preferences to shift away from labor and into leisure. One worker from Amazon, a major online retailer, said, "It's like I'm risking my life for $1. The low wages associated with careers in online retail did not compensate employees for the fear of catching corona. Also, travel restrictions due to the pandemic decreased the number of immigrant workers able to join the labor force. These factors will result in a decrease in labor supply, which pushes wages up and the employment level down, which is shown on the graph." In response to falling labor supply, many online retailers increased benefits to encourage labor force participation. For example, Amazon increased healthcare benefits and overtime pay. Increasing wages is most effective when wage elasticity of labor supply is more elastic because workers will respond more to higher wages. Workers with high wage elasticity tend to be low skilled, which most labor in online retail is low skilled. When wages increase, the substitution effect means that workers will give up leisure time for more hours of work because leisure has a high opportunity cost now. And the income effect means that workers will reduce hours of work because they can remain at the same level of income with less hours of labor. Whether hours of work increases due to this wage increase depends on which effect will dominate. Under the assumption that labor supply decreases and labor demand increases, we should see in the short-run equilibrium an increase in wages and an ambiguous change in the level of employment.
Prior to the coronavirus, e-commerce was expected to grow in a 2016 BLS forecast up to around 450,000 jobs by 2026. This was from an increased need for labor and customer services, shipping clerk, and packagers as the leading need for new employment. The expected growth to about 450,000 employees in e-commerce was significantly lower than what's actually panned out. Looking at Amazon, who has a 40% share in all of e-commerce trade, their employment has risen from below 200,000 in 2016 up to 798,000 in 2009. And with the increase in demand due to COVID, they added an additional 100,000 workers in April and 75,000 in May, totaling at 973,000, which is twice what the BLS projected for all of e-commerce. Notably, Amazon also increased the minimum wage for all workers in 2018 to $15 and raised wages of other workers that were receiving around $15. With this increase in wage and relative price of labor, they continued to still add more and more laborers with the scale. Because output is derived from demand, much of the changes in employment for past and present and future is based on the increased demand and the shift from brick and mortar stores to online shopping. And this is only expected to grow more as more large retailers dive into e-commerce, such as Walmart introducing a Walmart Plus option. Growth in e-commerce is particularly driven by the change in demand and the shift from brick and mortar stores to online orders. So a lot of the future orders depends on how consumers change their behavior once they feel like it's safe to go back to brick and mortar stores. A survey of many US consumers, however, found that they're very likely to continue buying goods online despite when it's safe to go back out. This is pretty consistent across all incomes, and generally it's expected that online shopping has permanently shifted up in long-term demand. It's expected that e-commerce will continue to keep growing as there is now a higher percentage of users that use it, are familiar with it, and plan to stick with it. However, how could things change with new policy? There's a lot of pressure on tech and online commerce to pay higher taxes on their sales. And should this happen and new welfare such as an income welfare like a negative income tax or universal basic income be implemented, it would be expected that non-labor income of workers should rise, and with a rising non-labor income, reservation wages should additionally rise, which could reduce the amount of labor supply available for these retailers. With a reduction in the labor supply, this should push towards a higher equilibrium wage. However, depending on how taxes are implemented, more internalizing the taxes could outweigh this push towards a higher equilibrium wage. Regardless, employment should continue to keep scaling with increased demand for online purchases. And in the long run, capital and automation of warehouse labor and the increased purchases of new fulfillment facilities may will increasingly substitute for labor if the relative price of labor increases.